Hello, my name is Joseph Foster, and this is my presentation on the slave trade, as well as the ships and the impossibilities of the voyages on these ships from Africa to the United States. In remembrance to all the children killed by U.S. bombs, today over 67 children will be found dead in Gaza. Many more will be found in Lebanon and Syria. Even more will be found in Yemen. And even more will never be found because they were vaporized. Some will slowly die, all alone from their wounds because a building collapsed on top of them. We were all complicit, we were all accountable. We may not have dropped the bomb, we sure as hell didn't stop it from being built. Those children will be allowed in God's kingdom. I can't say the same for us. I just want to add one thing. I realize that a lot of people click out of my videos when they see this slide, and I just want to say that this slide isn't meant to make anyone feel terrible or anything like that. It's just here for the people that maybe don't know what's really going on, and I just want them to wake up to the reality at hand and to realize that our taxes are funding this and it needs to stop. Again, not meant to hurt feelings. It's more meant to show the damage our government is doing to these poor people. So we're going to start with the first issue here of the slave trade. That it's an issue that I see that doesn't really make sense to me as far as the standard historical context goes. So issue number one, getting them on the ship from Africa to the United States. This section is going to cover the transportation issues that are very obvious to me and have been to me and many others for a long time. The number of crew members on a slave ship varied, depending on the size of the ship and the number of enslaved people it carried. For example, the British ship Brock's typically had a crew of 40 to 50 guarding 300 to 600 enslaved people. Some ships like the Henrietta Maria had crews as small as 14 members to control 200 to 250 enslaved people. Larger ships could have had crews of 100 or more, seeing more than 700 enslaved people. Smaller ships like the Hesketh carried a crew plus around 30 enslaved people. Slave ships generally carried significantly larger crews than ordinary merchant vessels of similar size because the crew was needed to sail the ship, manage the enslaved people, and be prepared to defend against potential revolts. So what doesn't make sense to me is that you're going to have, on average, one Westerner to 5 to 10 to 20, or even 20, or more African warriors who hunt and kill the most dangerous animals in Africa on the daily. I'm sorry, but armed or not, at that time, you don't have semi-auto guns. So if you're fighting 5 ripped African tribal warriors, at minimum, what are you going to do? Use your one bullet and get killed within seconds from the other 4? And you think these guys are going to be scared of our guns? I think not. That's problem number 1 with this story. These are people who are strong, who are brave as can be, who are trained in hand-to-hand combat, who hunt and kill the most dangerous animals every day to survive. You think they're going to be afraid of Westerners with these single shot guns? I really don't think so. It's just not realistic to me. So, issue number 2, the ship's capacity and conditions. As you can see in this picture, there's just over 200 slaves in this picture, which was much less than most slave ships. So they have no room to breathe, no room to move, no room for restraints to be mounted there. They're not even restrained in this picture at all. So what's stopping a revolt? A couple pea shooters on deck? I don't think so. And you need to consider the amount of waste all these people are going to produce. There's no way they had an efficient way to deal with that, and the smell alone would drive everyone mad on the ship. No way this is happening for 2 months. There's no way this is happening the way they taught us in school. I don't believe there would possibly be an efficient way to get rid of the waste on the ship. And you guys got to remember too, the language of the crew the white crew is going to be completely different from the language of the African slaves. They can't communicate with each other. So there's no telling the slaves, hey, do this with your waist. Hey, throw your waist out here. Hey, do this. Hey, do that. There's none of that. There's no communication between the two groups. It's just unbelievably unrealistic. Okay? So, the diet of the slaves is according to Google now. Food on slave ships was minimal and poor quality, providing insufficient sustenance for the enslaved people making the voyage. The diet typically consisted of carbohydrates, cassava, grains, Indian corn, barley, shelled peas, rice, and yams. Proteins: salted meats, beef, pork, chicken, and saltfish, and beans. Rations: records show standard rations for enslaved people were cornmeal and salted fish. One source mentions a weekly ration of 1 gallon of maize and 20 herrings per person, with half that amount for children. Daily rations might include yams, biscuits, rice, beans, plantain, and occasionally meat, though served in a communal fashion, 1 bucket per 10 men, which fostered quarrels and the transmission of disease. Water was rationed, usually about a half a pint, distributed 2 or 3 times a day alongside the meals. Nutritional deficiencies and various health consequences were a reality on the ships. The diet was severely deficient in essential nutrients like iron, vitamins, and fats, and other types of nutrients. Lack of fresh fruits and vegetables led to conditions like scurvy, causing lethargy, bleeding gums, and painful leg swelling. Dysentery, or the flux, was a major cause of death, likely exacerbated by poor nutrition, according to ResearchGate. High salt content in preserved meats increased dehydration among the enslaved peoples, whose bodies were not accustomed to such high salt intake. Food frequently rotted or was infested with vermin due to unsanitary conditions and high temperatures. The focus of non-perishable and affordable food, along with unsanitary conditions, meant enslaved people on the slave ships endured a brutal and unhealthy diet, contributing significantly to their suffering and high mortality rates during the Middle Passage. The math ain't mathing. So, for the 300 slaves alone, they would need 4,000 gallons of water for the trip, at 3 8-ounce servings of water per day. And let's say the same amount of food a day. Let's say it's rice, for example. So for the journey, that's 27,000 pounds of rice. Now, where are you going to store the rice? And 4,000 gallons of water. Wooden barrels, that would be 76 whiskey barrels full of water. And that doesn't include water to cook, shower, none of that. That's just for the slaves to survive, and the rice is just for the slaves as well, not even the crew. This is what 77 barrels in the front row looks like, okay? In the front row here, there's 77 or 78 barrels, I believe. Okay, that's a lot of barrels. Especially you got to move them around, you got to cut them open, you got to distribute the water to the slaves. It's going to be a hectic mess distributing this water to 300 to 600 people who are covered in waste. Because there's no sanitary way to do this, guys. There's not. Average amount of food per person. This is as well Google's explanation. Slave ships, Encyclopedia Virginia. While there isn't a single definitive answer for the total weight of food carried on a slave ship, historical records indicate that ships transported enough provisions to sustain the enslaved people on board during the transatlantic voyage, typically lasting several weeks or even months. Here's a breakdown of factors to consider. Varied ship sizes. Slave ships range significantly in size, from small vessels like the 10-ton Hesketh to larger ones like the 566 ton par. This size variation directly impacted the amount of cargo, including food, that could be carried. Food rations. The food provided to enslaved people was often meager and monotonous, whatever that means. Common rations included cornmeal, salted fish, and sometimes limited quantities of lard, peas, and greens. Quantity calculation. Based on the amount of food provided to individual enslaved people, a rough estimate can be made. For example, one historical source mentions an average U.S. slave consuming 179 pounds of meat, 119 pounds of dairy, 247 pounds of potatoes, 35 pounds of peas and beans, and 673 pounds of grain annually. During the duration of the voyage, the length of the transatlantic journey, typically 6 to 8 weeks, sometimes longer, would directly influence the total amount of food needed. And you guys got to remember, so 6 to 8 weeks was if everything went completely perfect the way back from Africa, okay? This trip has took as long as 6 months. On average, more than 3 months. All my calculations were based on best case scenario, guys. Worst case scenario, the possibility of this even being feasible just goes out the window as soon as you go over 2 months. Because the 2-month period is like the period where it is somewhat kind of possible, but once you get into 3 to 4 months and even 6 months, it's just, there's no way. There's no way. Not in the logic that I'm using and the calculations I've made. There's no way this is possible. How in the world would you keep a revolt from happening? So in order to keep a revolt from happening, you would have to keep hands and feet chained, but with that, you would have to take care of the bathroom and feeding needs by hand, because they're all chained up, which ain't gonna happen. There's no way there's people taking care of these slaves like that. I don't believe that a white crew would take care of, I don't believe 50 white men would take care of 300 to 600 Africans chained up, take care of their bathroom needs, feed them by hand. I don't see it happening. And yes, you could have just chains on their feet so they can't run. But if their hands are unchained, what happens if when you're going to give them food, one of them grabs you? You know how strong these men are? These African men? Okay? One of them grabs you as a white Westerner. Okay? At least in this time period. These tribesmen are so strong. These African tribesmen are so strong that you're not getting out of their grip. Once they have grabbed you, that's it. That's it. You may be able to shoot one of them, but if there's 2 of them grabbing you, you're pretty screwed. You know, at that point, they can even hold you hostage then. Because they can just kill you with their bare hands pretty quickly if they had to. That's what a lot of people don't think about is, like, who were these slaves before they were slaves? They were straight up warriors. Tribal warriors. Okay? And I know you guys may think I'm over-exaggerating when I'm speaking about these people's capabilities, but I'm really not. If anything, I'm underplaying it. If anything, I am giving the benefit of the doubt to the Westerners by not even expressing the full danger of dealing with these people the way that they supposedly were dealt with. Okay? I'm sorry, there's no way that you're going to get 300 warriors to just allow themselves to be chained up, allow themselves to be starved, allow themselves to be not given water, and just allow themselves to be slaves in the West. I don't see it happening. I don't see it happening when they could so easily just overthrow the boat and overthrow the crew. I don't see this happening. I really don't. Now, if you guys want to comment, how you guys see this being possible, I'd love to know. I'm not an expert on this subject. I'm not a historian on the subject. But I would really like to also understand how people come up with this story of slavery the way it's told. Like, who came up with this shit? Excuse my language. It just sounds like a fairy tale to me. It really does. So, how did the crew keep them from resisting? And this was the official story from Google, okay? To suppress revolts and maintain control over the enslaved people during a horrific journey of the Middle Passage, slave ships' crews employed a variety of brutal methods. Physical restraints. Men considered the biggest threat were often shackled in pairs with leg irons, and sometimes wrist manacles, restricting their movement and hindering any coordinated effort to rebel. Women and children, while sometimes granted slightly more freedom of movement, were still confined and subject to constant surveillance. Violence and intimidation. Floggings, whippings, and cat-o'-nine-tails, a multi-tailed whip, and other forms of torture like thumb screws were routinely used as punishment for even minor infractions or suspected attempts at resistance. This was done to instill fear and deter any thought of rebellion. According to the Equal Justice Initiative, captains with near absolute power were known for their harshness and readily used violence to maintain order. Remember, guys, even back then, the captain of the ship has all say in all activities on his ship, meaning the captain has the right to murder anyone on board at any given time, according to maritime law, and that's still true today. The captain can make anybody walk the plank at any given time. That's how the law of the sea goes, okay? And that was still true back then. So the captain ultimately had the final say in how the slaves were treated, how they were fed, how everything went. It was all up to one man, and that was the captain. Just keep that in mind. Fear and dehumanization. The constant fear of violent separation from loved ones and the terrifying conditions themselves, including belief that they would be killed and eaten by Europeans, which I highly doubt that, contributed to a climate of psychological control designed to break the spirits of the enslaved individuals. Ship modifications. As a response to resistance, slave ships were modified to enhance control. These changes included installing barricades to separate enslaved people from the crew and each other. Nodes, Albert IO. Some ships also utilizing netting around the edges to prevent desperate individuals from jumping overboard. Superior firepower. Slave ships were well armed with guns and even cannons, giving the crew any significant advantage in case of a rebellion. Well, one thing, the cannons aren't going to help you. The cannons are facing outward, so you're not going to use the cannons against the slaves, okay? And the guns that they had were all either 6-shooters or single shots. Alright, and I don't even think they had 6-shooters back then, if I can remember right. So everything was pretty much single shot, and not single shot as in break barrel or trapdoor weapons or bolt action. I'm talking single shot. Meaning you had to load the powder, you had to load the ball, you had to jam it down, just like a musket. So you have one shot, then you got like a 2-3 minute reload. So it's not a fast process. Not really 2 to 3 minutes. I mean, it can be done in one. But you get what I'm saying. Most of you get what I'm saying. Anyway. So, the crew, although often outnumbered, could use their weapons to suppress any uprising, separation, isolation. Enslaved men and women were often kept in separate compartments, with children sometimes allowed more freedom of movement. This separation could make it more difficult for individuals to communicate and organize resistance efforts. It is important to remember that despite these methods of control, enslaved Africans constantly resisted in various ways, from individual acts of defiance, like hunger strikes, jumping overboard, to collective revolts. According to AP, African American Studies, though many revolts were unsuccessful, they demonstrate the courage and resilience of the enslaved people and served as powerful challenges to the system of slavery. So that's the official stance of Google on, just how did the crews really keep these people in line. So, my whole thing is the lack of evidence for any of this. So, there's no intact slave ships. There's lack of documentation and lack of pictures, which is understandable. Both those are understandable. Lack of reasonable explanation just don't add up with all the reasoning I've used so far in this explanation. So many of this doesn't add up. There's not much there's not much to make this make sense. Okay? There's not many things that add up about this whole scenario. It doesn't add up how a bunch of African tribal warriors are just going to get on a ship because a couple of Westerners said so with single shot guns. That doesn't add up. What else doesn't add up is how you're going to get them all in restraints. They're stronger than you. They're better fighters than you. They don't even speak your language, so you can't communicate with them. So let's say somehow they get all 300 on the ship. Now, how are you going to take care of their bathroom needs? How are you going to feed all of them? How are you going to take care of their fresh water needs? How are you going to keep them from revolting and taking the ship from you and just taking it back to Africa without you because you're dead in the water? How are you going to, even if you get to America, let's say all this works out beautifully and they get all these people to America. What happens once you get them out of the shackles and off the ship? You think they're just gonna sing Kumbaya with you and just go along with your demonic plan of making them slaves? I don't think so. I definitely don't think so, especially after that horrific trip. No. It's just unbelievably dumb. It's such a dumb story. None of it makes any sense to me at all. And if I'm wrong and I'm just over exaggerating about all these points, I'm very sorry. But based on all the research I've done, I'm pretty positive that this did not happen. I'm pretty damn positive of it. So, continuing on, it's hard for gangs and governments with modern weapons to keep slaves even today. There's no way in hell 50 men today could shove 300 people in the hull of a boat and chain them up with single-shot weapons like muskets and muzzleloaders, especially if they're warriors that hunt every day with spears and are experts in hand-to-hand combat. There's no way. Best case scenario, 50 of the revolters get hit and the remaining 250 kill the captors. 250 people versus 50 hand-to-hand? And the 250 are trained hand-to-hand combat? They're mastered in hand-to-hand combat? It's just dumbfounding me, the ridiculousness of all this. It's dumbfounding. It's just so hard for me to try to buy into this whole slavery thing. Like, I believed it for years, too. I believed it until I actually looked into it. Then when I looked into it, I was like, oh, yeah, that doesn't add up. Oh, this doesn't add up. Oh, that doesn't make sense. Oh, yeah, that's not enough water. Oh, yeah, that's not nearly enough food. Oh, yeah, how are you going to keep the water and the food from going bad? Oh, yeah, how do you know exactly how long the trip's going to take? Oh, yeah, how do you know they're not going to kill you when you try to chain them up? Oh, yeah, how do you communicate with them? You don't speak the same language. There's so many different points to this. It's just ridiculous. But yet again, though, I'm just going to say is that I believed in all this most of my life. And I expect that that's the same for everybody else, too. We were all taught this in school. We were all taught this since we were as young as can be. About the slave trade and, the Underground Railroad and all this stuff. And what was her name? Harriet Tubman and stuff. We were all taught about the Underground Railroad, Harriet Tubman, her letting the slaves escape and taking them to safety. And, I just don't buy it. I don't buy it anymore. They lie to us about everything else. Why would they tell the truth about this? So this is a picture, which looks pretty real to me, of Moors. We'll get into who the Moors are here in a second. But working the fields, you know, they look like they've been fed. You see how their faces, as well, their faces are full? Like, as you can see, well, his face kind of, I mean, it's a kind of a blurry picture. But you can see like, look at her face, how puffy it is. These people aren't hungry. They're not starving, okay? Look at their clothes too. It's not like they have ripped, tattered, beat up clothes. I mean his clothes are nicer than most of mine, to be honest. And that's not saying much. I mean, I don't dress very well, to say the least. I try, but I don't own many nice clothes. But anyhow, these people are dressed very nice. Okay, they're dressed very nice. They're dressed very very suiting for what they're doing. They look like they've been well fed. They're hydrated. And they don't look miserable either. Like, I mean, he kind of looks down a little bit, but this isn't like, and one thing too is, you see all these people in the field posing for the picture? Where is all the guys with guns making sure they keep working? Where's the enforcement to keep them in the field? You know what I'm saying? What's to keep them from running away? I want to know. What is keeping them from running away? Is it a guy with a single shot taking the picture? I'm pretty sure the guy taking the picture doesn't have a gun either. So there's nobody out there with a gun, or I can't see him. I don't see. You know what this looks like? This looks like a bunch of people having a regular work day out in the fields, being paid for it, to collect cotton. That's what it looks like to me. Because it doesn't look like a bunch of starving, dehydrated, whipped, and abused slaves. That's not what this picture represents to me, okay? This picture right here. See? Full face. Faces aren't sunken in. So they're well fed, well dressed. Okay, they're all well dressed. They don't look like they're suffering to me. Okay? Maybe they're having a hard time, maybe it's a hard job. But it's one thing too, is a lot of people don't know about the work contracts either. There was a system where richer families in the United States would pay for your transport to the United States and pay you to work. Okay, because they needed workers. Guys, there wasn't a lot of people in the whole world at this time. Because you got to remember, there was just a reset. If you have watched my What is the Old World video, I've talked about the mud flood and the reset. And that was right before all this. Okay? And kind of during, too. What's the crazy part? Is that while the whole world's allegedly getting flooded, now this is just according to my theories and many others' theories, that the whole world was flooded around 1697. That's around that year, okay? So 50 to 100 years after that is when all this is happening. Alright? So most people died. Alright, there's not many people to work the fields. There's not many people to do anything. There sure as hell wasn't a bunch of people at auctions buying other people. I can assure you that was not happening. Okay? Because there was barely any people. Alright? And the people that were still alive after the whole world got flooded, around 1657, none of them were concerned about enslaving other people. The reason I have such a hard time talking about this Okay, it's just so, it's so idiotic to me. It's just so idiotic that a couple white men with guns are going to be able to control 10 times the amount of African warriors from Africa with single shot guns. It's just beyond, it's just beyond stupid to me. There's no freaking way. There's no way. So if the Africans weren't brought here on slave ships, then how did they get here? I'm going to show you guys who the Moors are. The Moors, also known as the Black Native Americans as well. The Moors is a group of Muslim black people who were in the Americas before Europeans even got here. They were everywhere, and so many black people in the U.S. are starting to realize that their ancestors originated here and they never came from Africa. That is a true statement. Every day I see more black people coming out about this. And mind you, all the information that I've learned about the Moors and the Moorish culture, I have learned from other black people. Okay? So this is supposed African Americans teaching me about this Moorish people. This isn't a bunch of white Europeans teaching me about black history. All the data and everything that I've gathered about the Moors is from black people. Okay? So don't think this is a white man lie that we just made up. That is not true. So continuing. So, yeah, in the U.S., a lot of black people in the U.S. are starting to realize that their ancestors originated here and they never came from Africa. And another thing that is amazing is that I heard this black woman saying she went to Africa and learned that they were never taught about the slave trade in school. So the Africans today aren't taught about the slave trade, but we are in America? That's a little weird to me. So if you're going to teach the Africans nothing about the slave trade, but you're going to teach the white Americans all about the slave trade, make that make sense. You would think it would be more of part of their history than it is a part of our history. But it's not even part of their history. It's not even talked about in their schools, but it's freaking broadcasted on loudspeakers at our schools. Sounds like some Zionist racism planting intervention is what that sounds like. So they never talk about the slave trade in African schools. That's an American thing. That's not part of their history. You would think it would be a huge part of their history if it actually happened. It's crazy. It's crazy to me. So we're going to go look at more pictures of the Moors. So this is another picture of a Moor, or painting of a Moor. Another painting of how some of the Moorish people looked. This one's probably my favorite right here. This guy has a sword, looks like a golden handle, golden sheath, big piece of gold in his hand. And the Moors had a lot of money too, guys. These were not poor African tribes. The Moors were organized, smart, very, very developed society before the reset. And a little bit after, too. The term Moors generally refers to the Muslim inhabitants of North Africa and the Iberian Peninsula. During the Middle Ages specifically, they were a population primarily composed of Berber and Arab people who spread Islam and established a significant presence in Spain and Portugal. Al-Andalus after their invasion. In 711 CE, the Moorish period in Iberia lasted until 1492. What else happened in 1492, guys? Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. Does that ring a bell? Kind of an odd year, leaving a lasting impact on Spanish culture and language. So, what it looks like here is, what if the Moors left that part of the world in 1492 and came to America? What if Christopher Columbus was never white? What about that? That's a lot to think about. What if it was the Moors who came here before the Europeans? It's just really interesting how that date, 1492, pops up when you talk about the Moors. Because that's also allegedly the date Christopher Columbus discovered America. And there's a lot of people who are very smart, people that I follow, that are now saying today that Christopher Columbus might have been black. Which I wouldn't doubt that at all. Considering what I know about the Moors and how the Moors were here before we got here. That's a fact. I know for a fact the Moors were here before we got here. Okay? For a fact. So, we're going to leave this part as it is. I will continue on in later episodes about the Moors and Moorish history and the slave trade. This will be continued. But for the rest of the presentation, we're going to move on to modern day slavery. Modern day slaves. This is a modern day slavery photo that is more heartbreaking and is a failure of humanity. The thing is, too, even in the modern day, you think 10 guys with AKs are going to try to restrain 300 people? Absolutely not. No. They're not that dumb. 10 against 300, even if the 10 have weapons, they're not even going to try that. And that just goes to show you, even with the AK that's 600 rounds a minute, 30 rounds in the magazine, and they wouldn't even try to do what Europeans tried to do how many hundreds of years ago with single-shot weapons? So you're telling me the people hundreds of years ago, single-shot weapons were more capable than the guerrillas with AKs today? No, absolutely not. These are modern slaves. Notice how there's not a bunch in one spot. The reason being is that they're not going to try and control hundreds of people at a time. It's not realistic. And also notice how not only sad, but malnourished these people already are. And they just became slaves. This looks like that they're actually being transported, or they're in a transportation area. Because you can tell this is not a living quarters right here. So they're being transported from this place to another place, I'd imagine, within a daily time frame. You get what I'm saying? So this is, odds are, one stop on the journey they have to take from where they were taken from to where they're eventually going to end up permanently. So this is just probably a safe house. This is not even their permanent residence. Alright? So you can only imagine how much worse this is going to get for these people. Because their journey has just started. I can already tell by looking at this picture. Their journey as slaves has just started. Sex slavery goes on today. We're never taught about it in school. So why are we never taught about sex slavery in school? Why aren't we taught about modern day slavery? It just always has bothered me. It's just bothered me that we were always taught about all this alleged slavery back in the day when we really know nothing about anything before the year 1800. Everything before the year 1800 that we've been taught is completely wrong. Completely. Okay? And it's just wild to me that they'll teach us something they have no evidence for, when they could be teaching us something that there's tons of evidence for. And that's child trafficking, that's sex trafficking, that's the trafficking of laborers. And as I'm gonna go on here, these are malnourished slaves in Africa. And I believe this is actually a picture from, there's this certain lake in Africa where it's a pretty massive lake. And there's a camp by this lake. And I can't remember the name of the lake. Gosh dang it, that bothers me. I completely forgot. I have it written down, but I'm not going to dig for it right now. This lake is where you see these nets here, okay? They fish with these nets, alright? And these kids have to dive down by hand and get these nets up once there's a certain amount of, I forgot if it's fish or if it's something else that gets caught in these, well, it's a type of fish that gets caught in these nets. And they have to do this all by hand. And they have to dive and grab these nets after they're filled and bring them to the surface. These kids get injured so badly doing this. I mean, some kids have lost eyes, like their eyeballs have been plucked out. There's just absolute horror stories from this lake, okay? At the end of this presentation, I'm going to try and find exactly which lake that is for you guys. This is another picture. These are children, which look like in the Middle East. I don't really know the background behind this picture, but as you can see, they're doing something with bricks, and you can see the stacks of bricks behind them. So for building, a lot of the time there's labor slaves used for building things. This is a kid having to do something with these bricks. That's what a slave looks like, okay? Tattered clothing, dirt all over them, hair all filled with dirt, malnutrition. That's what a real slave looks like, okay? Dirt, dirty hair, dirty clothes. God bless these children, and I hope the best for them, but I'm not trying to talk down about these people going through this. I'm just trying to show you what a slave actually looks like in the real world compared to the fantasy land that we've been taught as kids. That's all I'm trying to do here. You know, like this child is living in a horror movie. A freaking horror movie. A real horror movie. Okay? Not this fairy tale we've been taught about slavery. That doesn't even exist, in my opinion. Forced labor mining. Cobalt mining. Mainly. It's crucial to acknowledge the serious allegations of forced and child labor within the supply chains of materials used in lithium-ion batteries, particularly cobalt. While these concerns are more predominantly linked to cobalt mining, primarily in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC, it is important to understand the broader context of ethical sourcing within the entire lithium-ion battery supply chain. Here's a breakdown of the key concerns: cobalt and child labor in the DRC. The DRC is the largest producer of cobalt, a vital component in lithium-ion batteries. Reports from the U.S. Department of Labor indicate that cobalt ore from the DRC is often mined with child labor. The department placed DRC cobalt ore on its list of goods produced by child or forced labor in 2009. And these practices persist. Children working in artisanal cobalt mines in DRC face dangerous and hazardous conditions, including working underground in tight spaces, carrying heavy loads, and being exposed to injury risks from tunnel collapses and falling down mine shafts. Poverty, lack of education, and weak regulations contribute to the problem of child labor in these mines. Many tech companies that rely on lithium-ion batteries have been accused of being linked to these child labor practices through their supply chains. Continuing. Lithium mining and broader ethical concerns. While the direct link to child labor is stronger for cobalt, the broader lithium supply chain faces ethical challenges related to forced labor and human rights abuses. A recent study highlighted that 3/4 of lithium-ion battery suppliers are potentially linked to companies facing allegations of severe human rights abuses, including forced labor. These incidences often occur at the raw material mining and refining stages, making it difficult for battery purchasers to identify and address risks within their complex supply network. Specific concerns surrounding lithium mining itself include environmental degradation, lithium extraction, especially through brine evaporation in arid regions. Consume significant amounts of water, potentially harming ecosystems and local communities dependent on these water resources. Indigenous rights. Many lithium deposits are located in areas inhabited by indigenous communities, raising concerns about land rights, resource access, and the right to free, prior, and informed consent. FPIC for mining projects. Affecting their ancestral lands, labor practices. Ethical sourcing demands fair wages, safe working conditions, and respect for workers' rights in lithium mining operations, which the workers are never cared for, they're never respected, they're never paid what they deserve, and they're never taken care of after an injury. So all their medical needs are never taken care of. Mind you. My brief explanation. I think that all this slavery is facilitated and financed by all the corporate Western tech companies. They create these rebel groups, make them force the people to work in the mines under unbearable conditions to get the cobalt for the West, to build all these electric cars and phones and tablets for people like Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, that happen to be the same ethnicity. They're all Jewish, Ashkenazi Jews. Just so you know, by chance, they have the money to build safe mining facilities and pay the people, but they would rather pay terrorists, real terrorists, which they created to run these mines, and the people into the ground because it's cheaper and more brutal for the people. That's what Satanists do. Sorry, it's really hard for me to read and speak at the same time, especially when I'm going for such a long period of time. So my apologies, I run out of breath really quickly, and that's when I start making mistakes. So my apologies about that. One other thing I want to add to this is that Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and what's freaking name? Bill Gates. They're all Ashkenazi Jews. They're all Khazarian descent. They're all part of the same satanic group that run this world. They're all, no matter how much they act like they hate each other, they're all brothers in the same conglomerate, okay? They all are helping each other's interests in forming this new world order. They're all part of it. And I will soon go into that in future episodes. And as far as rebel groups, so groups like the ADF, Allied Democratic Front, are the groups that get these children and these laborers into the mines and force them to work at gunpoint. Okay? And yet again, there's not a couple guys with guns forcing hundreds and hundreds of people to work. There's a lot of people with guns forcing a lot of people to work. Mind you. And they are, the workers who do work in these mines, they are somewhat paid a tiny bit just so they can survive. They're literally paid a wage that is just enough for them to survive, and that's it. No more. There's going to be videos in the future that I'm going to do exposing these people in these groups. The UN is also complicit. I'll be getting into that soon enough in future episodes. How the UN really doesn't stop any of this. They might as well be facilitating it. This will be continued. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe and share. All I'm trying to do is expose the truth and pray for the children and the people of Gaza, please. Thank you very much for watching my presentation. Any of you that have made it to the end, you guys are the real OGs. Thank you. Really appreciate it. You guys have a good one. Bye-bye.